Right, right.
He has a brew.
Well, if you were looking at the TCG Player event not so long ago, the 50K, one of the things that happened there is that there were a number of players that showed up with a Predator Ooze deck, and this was a quiet story of that event, was that there were 4 players who played it, 3 players who made deep money with this deck, and this deck actually looks practically maybe about 1 or 2 cards off of that deck. I don't know if Brian Kibler came to it on his own, or if he had some friends, because I know he did not go to that event, if maybe he had friends that told him about it. But basically the thing about this deck to think about, Predator Ooze. It is a monster in creature fights.
Absolutely. And as you guys all know, as we see an Arbor Elf here from Brian, both players are underway. Brian is a green master. He loves himself a green card, as we're going to see a Precinct Captain here from Arthur. And he's gotten his hands on a new green deck. He's been trying different types of green decks in this format. Green-white at Grand Prix San Antonio.
Yep.
Trying to make Wolf here, Silverheart, and Wolf here Avenger work. This is a different take. It's going to be interesting to see exactly how well he's going to be able to do with this version of what he does best, which is get a hold of green decks and really tune them properly.
And on the other side of the table, Arthur, and is that Halavais, I believe is how you'd say that? Arthur Halavais, he's playing a green-white humans list. This is essentially pretty much the one that was taken by Sam Black from the deck that me and Jackie Lee and Brian Kowal made, which was based on the Star City Games Open win, which was in New Orleans. So, like, if you look at this list, this is basically a combination of those 3 lists. And we see Precinct Captain now has come in for the first turn there. And coming back on the other side, we've got Strangleroot Geist catching up with the action in play. An Arbor Elf, a Strangleroot Geist, 3 mana, and that adds a Goliath. A
Deadbridge Goliath.
Yep, and on the other side of the table is a Avacyn's Pilgrim and a Precinct Captain. Both players have 3 mana.
So see, Brian is definitely ahead as far as the board is concerned. Deadbridge Goliath is a 5/5, which is relatively large against the human deck. Strangleroot Geist was able to get in front of Precinct Captain the first time. Doesn't look like Precinct Captain's going to be able to do much right now. We see Arthur is going to come out with a Riders of Gavny, which he is starting for this tournament, 2 copies. Precinct Captain going to come on in. We're going to get confirmation on what Riders is naming in just a moment for you guys. Assuming it's something around...
Insect,
Yeah, I'm going to
maybe?
assume it's Insect because of Deadbridge Goliath, but we just want to get 100% confirmation. Also, Arthur's Cavern of Souls is naming human. That's how he was able to cast the Avacyn Pilgrim. So we see a Temple card in post-combat, and we're going to throw it back to Brian. So this has been... these are some cards here that we don't normally see in the standard format. Deadbridge Goliath, Riders of Gavny, those are kind of fringe cards that we're really seeing play a pretty big role thus far to lead the tournament.
One of the things about Standard, I really think Standard is still very, very much in flux. A lot of times formats get discovered and finished. I don't think that this is anywhere close to finished.
I'm inclined to agree with you. There's definitely a lot of ways you can go with green decks, as we're going to see Brian cast a Ranker here on the Deadbridge Goliath, making it a 7/5, and we see another Ranker. So the beatdowns are going to commence. This is kind of what Brian does best, right?
Yep.
Beating down with green creatures.
And we've got... looks like a block there on the Deadbridge Goliath. Now that's going to keep that creature alive because of the Gavny, the Riders of Gavny, but the trample will still go over. After combat, we've got a Lal Troll. That's the Lalteth Troll. Lotl F Troll. How do you pronounce that? I don't even know.
We can go with Lotleth.
I like Lal Troll.
Lal Troll. That makes it easy. Easy and fun.
Lal.
So we're going to see a forest here from Arthur. Arthur is... pretty far behind on the board, honestly. He's got to do something to catch up here. Something like a Sublime Archangel to be able to go over in the air and get some more damage through. His creatures having protection from Insect is pretty nice, but again, there's Rankers on the table to kind of trump that sort of thing. As we're going to see Precinct Captain come in again. Lotleth Troll is going to jump in the way to block. We're going to see Regeneration, so first strike, take care of that. And Riders of Gavny got in as well. It is a 3/3 Vigilance creature that we'll bring up on the screen for you guys because a lot of people haven't seen Riders of Gavny very much. It doesn't get a ton of play.
It's one of those cards that when we looked at the New Orleans winner, I know that me and Jackie Lee were like, really? Should we play that card? Let's not do it. And here it is back. And also I know that when Sam Black was working on this with Jackie Lee after they went off with it from the Grand Prix, that one of the things that they discovered was that, this Riders was not a mistake.
Yeah.
So stepping away from it might have been the mistake.
Yeah. As we see Garrick Relentless on the second main phase. It takes out the Troll. Brian had to discard a card to be able to trade with it, as you guys see Riders of Gavny on the screen, but Garrick basically took out all the Troll and the last card in Brian's hand, which was a Deadbridge Goliath, which might seem like a bad discard, but it isn't.
Oh, it's got that awesome ability. What's one of the new Golgari things? It's not Dredge, no. Scavenge is our new ability, which lets us essentially take back that dead creature and add its power and toughness into play on something. And you can see that the cost here to do that is 6. Sounds like a lot of mana, but +5/+5 is no joke.
No, especially when your creatures have Rancor in them.
Okay.
So trampling across, pretty big game here. Brian kind of going through the motions this turn, deciding what he wants to do. I think this draw step for the turn Adrian was an Overgrown Tomb, so he does have access to 6 mana, and if he wants to scavenge, he can do that. But right now, he's just kind of considering his options on what he wants to do.
If you're just joining us, I'm Adrian Sullivan here in the booth with Cedric Phillips. You can see on the screen there Brian Kibler, the Dragon Master himself. This is round 1 of the Star City Games Open Series featuring the Invitational. And we've got green-black aggro. This is a Predator Ooze deck, which has not yet appeared on in play, versus Arthur Halavais with green-white humans.
And Arthur wanted people to know at home that he does judge. He's local. He does do some judging as well, but he is one of the players that he considers himself to be both a judge and a competitive level player. And I mean, he is qualified for this tournament, so he can definitely play a card or two. As we are going to see the Overgrown Tomb in Brian's hand here come into play. He's going to take 2, and it looks like we're likely to see a scavenge this turn. He's just trying to decide, what am I going to scavenge onto?
One of the crazy things, we have these huge monsters, we've got Rancor and all these other things happening. These life totals, you would think that the life total should be lower.
Yeah.
Nope, this is correct. This is where we're at. This is going to change, though. Now we've got, it looks like a total of 12 trample coming on over, when with some blocks. Okay, there we go. Now the life totals are correct, 13 and 8. Yeah, I just asked our director about that, and he updated it, and so it looks like that lag has been corrected. 13 to 8 is the current life totals before the block. And look at that damage. That is 12 trample coming on in. What are you going to do, Arthur?
Now, this is interesting. Brian opting to play the Overgrown Tomb untapped and then not scavenge. How do you feel about that play?
I think one of the things, gosh.
So
right there, Cell Charm is part of it, right? But I mean, you could put it on the Arbor Elf, perhaps.
I mean, if he puts it on the Arbor Elf, it doesn't get to attack this turn, which kind of stinks. Maybe Brian was just trying to read him for Selesnya Charm, but okay, we're going to see it put on post-combat. So Arbor Elf's going to turn into a 6/6 now.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there are 2 Rancors in Brian's hand as well. So I guess, Brian just trying to clear the way, basically.
Now, Brian is still under pressure here. His opponent has 5 damage on the table, plus the ability to create a 1/1 token, 6 damage.
Pardon. No, you're right. My apologies.
5,
you're right,
5. And the glare, I don't think that I see any townships.
But what you do see...
He scoops it on up.
What you do see is a concession.
Yep. Now, why did he scoop it on up? Well, a part of that is he can see 10 trample damage coming for the next turn. And I guess he doesn't see any outs. So, to the sideboard.
Well, we'll go with Arthur first because Arthur is the one that's down a game, so he will be playing first. And taking a look at that deck list, as far as things that probably Arthur walking in this tournament, I'm sure he was like, I didn't know it's going to be playing against Deadbridge Goliath this weekend. And other, large green-black monsters. He hasn't even seen Predator Ooze yet.
Yeah.
But either way, he is playing against a green aggro deck with large creatures, so he does have these 2 Oblivion Rings on the board.
Yep.
Which I think you're going to be joining
I think the 4 cards that are what I think of as the obvious cards are the 2 Oblivion Rings and the 2 Intrepid Hero. Intrepid Hero is white 2, essentially for a big creature murderer. You can tap to kill a creature of power 4 or greater. Now, other than those 4 cards, I think after that, then you start getting into question marks. Garruk Relentless is useful for picking off things like Arbor Elves, but it becomes pretty weak when you get to a point where the game is dominated by big creatures. So there's a question mark in my mind about whether or not Arthur uses it. Butcher's Cleaver is a card that you could consider because you're in a race and you've got a lot of humans, but then it's also slow. So that's an issue too.
It's a huge mana investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, Rest in Peace seems like it'd be a great card against cards like Strangrootgeist or things like Scavenge, but it doesn't actually do anything when it hits play, and you're in an aggro matchup.
Yeah.
So the 2 obvious cards are Oblivion Ring and Intrepid Hero, 2 copies of each. And after that, I think you've got to kind of figure out which path you want to go down if you want to go any further into any of those other cards.
It's interesting, too, as you brought up Butcher's Cleaver, a card that doesn't see a ton of play, kind of like a Loxodon Warhammer knockoff, if you will.
Right.
He's playing against a black-green deck. He saw Golgari's Guildgate. He saw Woodland Cemetery. He saw Overgrown Tomb. I think, in Arthur's mind, I think it's safe to assume that there's probably some Abrupt Decays looming somewhere.
That makes sense.
In Brian's deck list. So, am I going to make that investment and then, get blown out in my attack step by Abrupt Decay?
I mean, one of the things is green-black speaks to Abrupt Decay. You would imagine it's there. And if we look at the main and sideboard for Brian Kibler, he doesn't have any.
So now it's the game inside the game. You think Abrupt Decay is there, but Brian doesn't actually have any in his deck list, which is curious, I think, as well. It depends on what he thought he was going to play against this weekend. Some of the bigger decks in the format, zombies, blue-white flash decks. Abrupt Decay is not great.
Yeah, so. Well, I think one of the conclusions here, you can't decay a Thundermaw Hellkite.
Yeah.
And that is a card that you actually could have problems with.
Can't decay a Falconwrath Aristocrat either.
And he's got Tragic Slip, which could take care of a Falconwrath Aristocrat unless really weird things happen. And he's got Ultimate Price that can take care of a Thundermaw Hellkite. And I think that Brian's expectation is something that I found when I was playing Predator Ooze, is that you just beat up on the ground. Predator Ooze, green, green, green for a 1/1 that's indestructible and gets bigger every time it attacks and gets bigger every time it kills something. It's a +1/+1 counter. I just found in my own experience, you didn't have to worry about other creatures on the ground because the Ooze would just win the ground.
Sure, it just wins the ground all by itself.
And so he's like, I'm going to go with Ultimate Price. I'm going to go with Tragic Slip. I'm going to go with Garrick. And so part of the reason maybe he doesn't have Abrupt Decay is that. What he does have, though, I think that his Tragic Slips are going to be useful. And you see a card in the sideboard that's really funny, Ranger's Guile. What this card is, it's the no, you don't get to Selesnya Charm my absurd creature.
Yeah.
That is what it's for, is to keep your absurd creature from getting taken out.
And I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those come in. Brian has 2 copies of Ranger's Guile in his sideboard. Other things that he has in his sideboard, 4 Duress, 3 Deathrite Shaman, not really great in this matchup. 2 Sever the Bloodline, I could see those coming in this game. The games between these 2 players, I don't think they're going to go extremely long, but I think they'll go long enough where, A, casting the first half of Sever the Bloodline is completely reasonable, but B, I wouldn't be surprised to see 1 flashback as well.
Yeah.
Other than that, you see 1 copy of Appetite for Brains in his sideboard, and you see 2 Tragic Slips, which I don't expect Appetite to come in here, of course. It's more for the Control Mirror, Supreme Verdict, Terminus, what have you. But I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see the other 2 Tragic Slips join us.
Well, one of the things that both of these decks are going to do, so there's the classic discussion of what you do in beatdown on beatdown, and one answer is to go big, and another answer is to go controlling.
Yep.
And I think both of these players have a sideboard set up that in a matchup of another aggro deck, both of them plan on becoming slightly slower and controlling the game a little bit more.
Sure. So it's really going to be about role assessment here, and who's a classic article, who's the beatdown.
Right.
Honestly,
I mean, there's a reason why that article gets cited so much. If you get a chance, if you've never read Who's the Beatdown, use your Google. You can find it on StarCityGames.com. It's archived there. It's a really great article about how to understand what your role is when you're playing against another player who maybe has a similar deck to you.
And I think these decks are, even though one's green-white and one's green-black, these decks do line up pretty similarly. Like, they both do have aggressive draws and aggressive starts. They also both can play like control pretty well. They also both can come out of nowhere and punch you in the face for a lot of damage. Brian has Rancors. He has Wolfear, Avengers. He has ways to deal a lot of damage. He has Unwall Tracker to kind of take over a slower game, while on Arthur's side, he has cards like Sublime Archangel and Silverblade Paladin to get damage through really quickly. So things can turn on a dime really fast in this matchup really quickly. So we see both players keep 7. Arthur leads out with an Avacyn's Pilgrim, and we are going to see a turn 2. There's the Butcher's Cleaver.
There it is. Now, the thing about this card is that the Cleaver is a card we almost never saw outside of Limited. In Innistrad Limited, the Cleaver, you could put that in an Invisible Stalker and your opponent would cry.
I have, and I'm not too proud, but a win's a win.
I believe that's a Riders of Gavany, but there's a lot of glare on it. I'm not sure.
That is a Riders of Gavany, and we will get confirmation of what it is naming in a moment, but either way, we call that a combo with Butcher's Cleaver. But what we have here from Brian is the Predator Ooze that you spoke of.
Yep. Now, that Predator Ooze, it's not going to do nearly as much work as it wants to do, because it's going to be able to be, jeez, that is a Rancor and a Cleaver. That makes it +5/+0 onto this 3/3. That's an 8/3 life-linking, trampling human that has, I'm going to guess, protection from zombies.
Yes, it does.
That's all humans have protection from zombies. Arthur Halavais looking pretty strong in this game.
He's feeling pretty good, and it's hard not to. And it's interesting, as we brought up in the sideboarded games, bringing in Butcher's Cleaver is a bit of a risk because of Abrupt Decay, a card that you would expect, but he said, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to bring it in, and if he has Abrupt Decay, he has it, and it's very clear, to me at least, that Brian doesn't have it. I mean, we have the information, but just, he's kind of looking over the game state right now, just like, ugh, I'm in a pretty bad situation here. What am I going to do to get out of this?
And honestly, the only thing that I see Brian being able to do here is putting up a huge enough non-zombie to take care of it. And unfortunately for him, most of his big creatures, they're not going to stop that Butcher's Cleaver. The best they can do is hop in the way. Wolfear Avenger can soak up 3 of the damage. If you've got 2 mana to regenerate, it'll stick around. But right now, Brian's in a lot of trouble. Now, if Brian had 20 more life, maybe he could mount up a defense. But, he doesn't.
And one of the fun things, one of the small things to look at here, Adrian, obviously Arthur's board state is very good right now. Riders of Gavany on Zombie, Rancor, Butcher's Cleaver, what have you. Vigilance playing a huge role in this game. Brian could attempt to, it would be strange, but he could attempt to race, Butcher's Cleaver in these sort of situations. He can't even do that now because Riders of Gavany gets to attack and block because of Vigilance. So,
well, even with, what's this? Okay.
He's going to pay the price.
Get out of here. You are dead. To pay the ultimate price. And the thing about it is, Brian can swing back and deal some reasonable amount of damage, but he's still facing a Cleaver. There's still a human out. And, yeah. I wonder, we've got a small pause. Our spotter at the table is checking on something, I believe.
So what it looks like here is there was an ultimate price cast on Brian's creature. On Arthur's creature, the Riders of Gavany. He put the Riders of Gavany in the graveyard immediately. Rancor trigger. We don't know if he was able to.
Oh boy!
Is to okay the mandatory trigger?
Look at his face there. He looks unhappy.
Yeah, can't really quite tell. And it seems like they're going to decide exactly what happened here. If Rancor's going to go back to his hand or not. And so it was basically like that.
Smile.
Yeah. So we're going to see exactly what the ruling is going to be, and we'll get confirmation for you guys on what the ruling is going to be in just a moment. But as far as other things are concerned in this game state, Brian is taking care of what I would say is the biggest problem thus far, which is the Riders of Gavany, having protection from zombies, having the Vigilance creature with the Butcher's Cleaver in play, not taking another hit. He was able to work himself out of that situation. Now he can try to get himself back in the game and get Arthur dead. But again, he is going to have to beat that Butcher's Cleaver, which he doesn't have an answer to in his main deck.
Like, one of the things to think about is that when you have a Butcher's Cleaver and it's actually a real thing, like you've got humans, so you get to have the lifelink, that buffer of time that you get from gaining the life means that you can actually remount new offense even if they've answered your initial creature. So, Butcher's Cleaver, if unanswered, directly answered, as you were talking about with Abrupt Decay, can cause real huge problems, because not only is your opponent's life going down rapidly, even if they actually kill creatures at different points, that buffer gives you time to bring a new creature out to pick up the Cleaver.
And it gives you tons of draw steps too. Just being able to work himself out of maybe Mana Flood or something, because he is at 28. He's not at 18. He's not at 14.
Yep.
It gives him more time to draw some of his better cards in this deck. And as you guys know at home, with Green Humans, this is a heavy hitting deck.
And it looks like the Rancor has been brought back to Arthur Halavais' hand.
And there it is right now in Champion of the Parish, and we are going to see Butcher's Cleaver doesn't tap for mana. There we go. But Avacyn's Pilgrim does.
That was kind of funny.
We're going to suit up and make another gigantic threat here with Champion of the Parish.
Predator Ooze. Oh, I love that card. And it's funny, I was talking to the people that created the Predator Ooze deck for the TCG Championship, and one of the things about it, I had been trying to figure out how to make this deck work in mono green, and the answer was not mono green. It was the black for the lol trolls, for the prices, for the tragic slips, things like that. You see the Predators come in, it becomes a 2/2 immediately, and Brian is sitting back with his lol troll as a blocker. Can you say it for reals, though, instead of lol troll? Because you can actually say it. I'm just so used to saying lol troll. It's all that comes out of my mouth.
I believe in you. I believe in you. Lotleth.
Lotleth.
I believe in you.
Gavany Township comes down for Arthur. End of turn. Oh, it's a Wolfear Avenger.
In the house. So Arthur is going to, he's okay with basically, building his guys via Gavany Township. This leads me to believe that Arthur doesn't have any other human cards in his hand for Champion of the Parish, so he's going to build up his creatures that way. Brian is going to try to catch up the best he can by establishing a board position with more creatures, with Lotleth Troll, with Wolfear Avenger. He can attack with Predators. That's the way he's going to have to go about doing this.
Now, when Wolfear Avenger was printed, a lot of people presumed that it was going to really push its way into the aggressive green decks, and it didn't happen then. This was in the moment when Delver was a real real deck. And by real, I mean we had all of the supporting cards for Delver. And one of the things is formats change, and if Wolfir Avenger didn't quite make the splash people expected before, remember, a bunch of cards rotated out, and here we're seeing it in play. It could well be that where it wasn't working very well before, it works now. Arbor Elf joins the team for Brian Kibler.
We're going to see a Gavany Township activation here for the end of turn with Arthur. I know that, and if you've read any of Brian's stuff on SCG Premium side, you know that he is a big fan of Wolfir Avenger. He said it was very, very good for him at Grand Prix San Antonio, and it doesn't really surprise me. It's a card that a lot of people have kind of forgot has existed, and it's one that, you know, I could very easily hear many stories happening this weekend where, you know, it's just like, hey, guy attacked with his 2/2, and I sharked him with Wolfir Avenger, and it's just a card that just doesn't see a lot of play, as we see a Garrick Relentless here from Brian attempting to take down the Avacyn's Pilgrim. And he's going to activate Gavany Township in response, so it will trade with the Avacyn's Pilgrim, and now we're going to see a tragic slip on the Champion of the Parish. Rancor coming back to his hand, but the board is clear, and the Ooze, along with the rest of the gang, are coming in.
Right, look at that. Now, I'm actually really curious about Brian's deck, if he came up with this on his own, or if it's the deck that Lucas Carlson, who is a Wisconsin State champion, designed, or not. I mean, because parallel development is real. We see Oblivion Ring take out that Predator Ooze, good call. But yeah, I mean, just because one person came up with the deck doesn't mean someone else can't come up with it too. I'm curious to find out from Brian the genesis of the cards that he has right there in front of us.
As we're going to see these guys come across here. Arbor Elf, Lotless Troll, and Wolfir Avenger coming across. And now Deadbridge Goliath post-combat. Brian, the world is your oyster, my friend.
Look at all of that power.
One of the nice things about this deck, I can already tell, the closing speed on this black-green deck seems like it's very real. You know, this deck looks like it can deal a lot of damage very quickly. We haven't even seen Dread Mangler yet or anything like that.
Well, and the thing also about how this deck works, imagine that someone casts, you know, a Mizium Mortars, or they cast a Supreme Verdict. If Brian is prepared for it, oh, and it's over. If Brian is prepared for it, he's got so much regeneration or indestructible or scavenge, he doesn't even usually care. It's like, oh, yeah, you got my elf. Attack you for 7.
Well, so we see the Dragon Master, the Hall of Famer, Brian Kibler, wins 2-0 with his brew.
That's a quick 2-0.
With his brew. Predator Ooze, that's one for you. Very, very impressive.
Now, one of the things that was kind of cool, you saw Arthur Halavais, what he did. He had an Oblivion Ring. It was his first opportunity for removal. What did he do? Took out the Ooze. And you have to. You cannot let the Ooze live.
Yeah, in creature mirrors like this, and you said it at the top, it's a card that dominates the ground very easily, and it just dominates. This is the kind of matchup where Predator Ooze is at home.
Oh, absolutely.
Honestly, this is exactly where it wants to be. I mean, especially against green-white humans, a deck that, you know, it does have a little bit of difficulty of, like, you know, pushing through on the ground. Obviously, Rancor makes things easier, of course, but if you don't have a Rancor as a way to push through, you know, it kind of just trumps Silverblade Paladin all by itself.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
You know, double strike is nice, but it doesn't matter if you can't get through my indestructible guy.
Absolutely. So. I mean, and